Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Tara Halliday. She is an imposter syndrome specialist and a best-selling author. Welcome to the show, Tara.
Thank you very much, AJ. It's great to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form.
Mm.
And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about overcoming imposter syndrome. But before we come to this, Tara, let's understand about your journey, your background, so that people know who they are listening to and also learn from your journey itself.
Right. Well, my journey, my journey started with imposter syndrome. Actually, I'd done my university degree. I was offered a fast track management position, and my imposter syndrome said I couldn't possibly. That's an invitation to fail. So I actually went back to university and I studied for a PhD, and I had a career in engineering. But finally, after 10 years, I came back to what I really wanted to do, and that was study therapy, psychology, and help people feel better. So that's 24 years ago, I retrained and started as a coach and therapist. And this last 8 years, I've focused exclusively on imposter syndrome.
Wonderful, wonderful, Tara. Now let's look at it from the simple basics of this whole term, imposter syndrome. What is it? People have heard about it, but I have heard about it, but I've never technically gone and checked the literal meaning of that. So is it imposter syndrome? Suppose if we divide the two words and just talk about imposter, does the meaning still remain the same when we add syndrome to it? How would you like to help us understand the meaning, true meaning of imposter syndrome from a layman's perspective?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's start with the syndrome, because syndrome is a very specific word in the medical world, which is a dysfunction. Imposter syndrome is actually not a medical syndrome, so you won't need therapy for it. You can't be diagnosed. There's no medication. It's actually it's been casually applied, and so it's just a phenomenon. Really, that's all it really means. Imposter syndrome is feeling like a fraud, feeling like you're not quite good enough when you're not a fraud. So it affects high achievers, successful people who are doing really well in their lives, and yet still have this underlying feeling that maybe they know they're good, but they're not quite good enough. And that causes a lot of effects, a lot of stress. It influences decision making. It can keep people it can drive people to keep themselves out of the spotlight, or it can make them push to try and be perfect, and then it can lead to burnout. So it has significant effect on people's careers, not just how they feel and how they perform, but how they actually achieve what they're fully capable of achieving.
Right, Tara. So if why does it only happen with, you see, high achievers, and especially in business and entrepreneurship? Why not anywhere else? I have not heard, maybe I'm wrong, but I've not heard a politician having this imposter syndrome, or someone who is in a tough job, they are having an imposter syndrome. Why is it that people who are in well-to-do positions, they are having imposter syndrome and not anyone else? Help us understand and correct me if my understanding is off the mark.
Yeah, well, so imposter syndrome affects everyone in whatever industry there are. So you mentioned politicians. Jacinda Ardern, who was the Prime Minister in New Zealand, she actually quit due to burnout. And 2 years earlier, she'd been talking about imposter syndrome. Meryl Streep, who has more acting awards than anyone else on the planet, before she films every movie, she says to herself, why does anyone want to come and see me? So it is everywhere. One of the reasons we don't see it so much is people don't talk about it. People think that it's a character flaw or a weakness or something wrong with them. And so they keep it a secret. So I work with executives. We see it at the top level of executives, chairman, board chairman, group chairmen. You know, you can't out succeed imposter syndrome. There's always the hope that if I just, oh, I don't know, get this next position, this next promotion, then I'll start to feel like I'm completely good enough, like I'm aligned with my success. And that simply doesn't happen. And the root cause of it is a belief that affects just about everyone in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to understand then is that, many people are humble, high achievers are very humble, and they introspect. Many of these people are also, learners, lifelong learners. And that is why they are a bit modest. They take their success, they understand their success, but they take it a bit more lightly, do not let it go onto their heads. And that is why they keep on introspecting. How do we differentiate between the learning personality, the self introspection people who ask more questions to themselves so that they can refine their art or whatever they. How do we compare that with imposter syndrome? How do I know whether it is self introspection or I am suffering from imposter syndrome?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. So if you were just reflecting on yourself without imposter syndrome, then you might say, well, you know what? I didn't handle that meeting very well. Here's a few things I might want to do in the future. But you wouldn't feel bad about it. You wouldn't feel it made you a bad person. You wouldn't judge yourself. And that's the difference with imposter syndrome. What we do is we put together our worth as a person with our actions. So if we do something good, we are good. We do something bad, we are bad. And that means when you then come to the reflection and you see something that you're uncomfortable with and you don't like, then you feel bad. It causes stress, it causes anxiety, and it throws up your nervous system, and it causes you to do all sorts of behaviors like perfectionism, comparing, over preparing, all of those things that are really about trying to make yourself feel better because of this stress.
Right, right, Tara. Now, a lot of people, we all know about a good percentage of, people fudge in their resumes. And it has come to light, even the topmost people, CEOs and all,
Yes.
and a lot of employees also. So
Yes.
why is, and in many places you will find those, people who brag, who tell lies to do, it's very common. Why do they also any time suffer from any of this imposter? Because actually they are imposters. Even people
Yeah.
who are in some of these CEOs who are in those positions, do they ever suffer it, or is it that they are immune to such a thing that actually those who should actually feel like that do not feel it, but the real achievers feel it? How do we look at it then? Means have they developed some mechanism, some sort of a internal vaccine against this syndrome? How would you like to help us understand this?
Yeah. So the first point about people being genuine imposters, right? Lying, pretending they're something they're not. That's not imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is where you are capable, you are competent, you are good enough. You're just not feeling it on the inside. And then the people who are genuine imposters, they may have a lot of stress. They may not, but it doesn't. You can have both if you like. You can be a genuine imposter and have imposter syndrome. So there's no correlation really.
Okay, okay. So then, what causes this particular imposter syndrome? Is it like the immunity thing that some people are more, their immunity is a bit weak, so illnesses can strike them. Some people are very strong, so that will not. So in the same sense, high achievers, some are high achievers, they will never feel it, but some high achievers, they will feel the impact of imposter syndrome. Why is it that some are impacted, others are not?
Yeah, great question. So imposter syndrome, it affects over 70% of high achievers, right? So the number that we're looking at who are not having it is only 30%. right? Which is a lot less. Some of those people are simply unaware that the stress that they're experiencing is imposter syndrome. So that's they just don't know. Or they think it's themselves, or they blame other people. So that's just a habit. 4% of them don't have a healthy connection in parts of their brain, so we'd label them as a sociopath or a psychopath. So that's 4%, and some of them have such a strong support system around them that they don't. It kind of damps down the stress of everything, or they haven't come across big enough challenges, so it's almost like they've kept themselves safe. So like I did, rather than do the management fast track, I went to where it was safe for my PhD. And you can say a PhD is high achieving, and sure, but it was me running away from something that might have challenged them. And at that point, I would not have said I had imposter syndrome. So it could be they just haven't had the something that's challenged them enough to trigger the stress of it.
Right. So how do I know whether I have imposter syndrome? Are there any particular signs that I should watch out for? And is it only very high achievers? Can't normal people also have it? Because see, it's not about high achievement is also very relative. A
Mm-hmm.
person with meager resources but achieving fair degree of success, taking care of himself and his family, it's a big success for him or her. But
Yes.
somebody who has got lots of resources, right kind of education, great MBA degree, getting to the right places, great connections, they may have imposter syndrome. For them, they may be successful. For the world, they may be high achievers. But if you look at it percentage wise, they have only moved from point A to B. Whereas a
Yeah.
person with simple resources have actually moved from A to so many, alphabets. If we look at so many
Yes.
milestones they have covered, why
Yeah.
don't they suffer from imposter syndrome, or do they also suffer from it?
Yes, it comes up. It comes up whenever we identify with what we do. That's why it affects. We notice it affecting high achievers more because they're more identified. Like, I am a doctor, I am an engineer, I am a CEO, I am an executive. Like, the more of their identity is tied up with their success, and so it just puts a bit more pressure on them, because the consequences, if people found them out to be a fraud, even though they're not a fraud, but if people found them out that they weren't quite as good as those people thought they were, the consequences of that would be very public, would be very impactful in their lives, and so people be ashamed of it. So it's more of that identity perception part that makes people feel it more.
Okay. You talked about support system. Those people, you talked about the 30%, especially those people who have great support system, they tend to, are better protected from imposter syndrome, if I understand it.
Yeah.
So does it mean that people who have better support system, they will thrive in spite of whatever? Or if we look at it from another point of view, is it that people who have gone through stress tests in their lives, they will be able to protect themselves from imposter syndrome? And it's like a car. If it has gone through those tests, internal company tests, then it will be much more resilient in terms of, if you're driving it even on difficult roads. How would you like to put our social environments vis-a-vis imposter syndrome for high achievers?
Yeah, so there are triggers for imposter syndrome, and one of them is a combination of high challenge and low support. Now, when you're a high achiever, you're already in that high challenge arena, right? You're already being pressured and tested because it's a high performance job. So the low support, if you had low support, it would just make it worse, right? If you had higher support, it would damp it down a bit, but it doesn't make it go away. So it's more like it's covering it up, really.
Okay, okay. Within an organization, why is it that it is bosses, leaders, we talk about leaders suffering from this syndrome? What about employees? Do employees also have this problem? And is it that employee then goes up the ladder, they start having problems and not below that? Does it mean the managers should also be having imposter syndrome because they are also fairly paid, they are also quite good in their hierarchy? How does that work?
Yeah, so with a high, with imposter syndrome, it can affect you at all levels. There are several behavioral symptoms with imposter syndrome, and one of them is avoiding opportunities, just like I did with that leadership position, right? Uh, and so if you're a manager and you're offered a promotion and you say, "Oh no, I couldn't possibly," who am I to have that? Who am I to be an executive, right? Then that might stop your career. Right, so you might never reach that point. So the imposter syndrome has stopped your career progression. And so that's really the difference, but it can show up at any level.
Right, right, Tara. How do we look at imposter syndrome vis-a-vis purpose? Like, if I don't like something, even if it is very powerful, very powerful in terms of the word, but I don't like it. You did not like it, but you said I left it. Now you don't have to think it. People, I may not want to look at it that way. For others, it might be that you have quit something rather than leaving something for something bigger. A lot of people choose not to get into a rat race. They want to go for a peaceful life. They are not quitters. They are looking at a higher purpose. How
Yeah.
do I then bring that sense of that I'm living for a purpose rather than leaving something because I could not cope with it? How does that work for people?
Yeah, so I see this a lot, particularly in the corporate world, where people get imposter syndrome and they feel that, I don't belong at this team, at this level, in this business, in this industry. And so they might quit and become a consultant or quit and do something entirely different because they think that they weren't good enough. Now, that was actually not true, and they were capable and competent, but the imposter syndrome was creating that stress that instead. And what these people find is that when they go off to do a new venture, it follows them. It doesn't go away, and that's one of the problems with imposter syndrome. You can't escape it, because even when they're living their best lives, or doing really great work as a consultant, they still feel the same way. And that's very disappointing for a number of people when they think they've solved the problem by leaving the challenging corporate world, but actually the problem hasn't gone away. It's people can get severe regret from that, from having left something that they could have done, but they couldn't find a way to get past the stress of imposter syndrome.
So how do I get rid of it? How does one get started with this without any regret of leaving anything, rather considering that it's their choice, their way of self-care?
Yeah. So to get rid of imposter syndrome, you have to get rid of the root cause of imposter syndrome. And that is that belief that your worth and your actions are the same. And this is not a belief that is caused by a stressful childhood, poor parenting, some trauma, nothing like that. It's actually a developmental step that most people never managed to get past when around about 2 years old. So it's nothing to do with trauma or anything like that. Back in the 1950s, when this was identified, the neuroscientists of the day thought that there was nothing you could do. You can't change an early established belief as an adult. Well, now neuroscientists know about neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to change and grow. And now there are very specific ways that we can change this belief. And when you change this belief, all of the symptoms of imposter syndrome fall away. And so, people then have what I'd say is an effortless confidence, right? They'd forget to doubt themselves. And then their work then becomes something that's exciting. It's an adventure rather than something that's stressful and risking them being burnt out.
Right, right, Tara. Now let's learn a bit more from your books. Outsmart Imposter Syndrome and Unmasking the Coach's Guide to Imposter Syndrome. Uh, what are these books all about? The name says it, but I want to understand from you for the audience.
Yeah, well, the first book is a book for coaches. Unmasking is a book for coaches to help them with other people who have imposter syndrome. Outsmart imposter syndrome is for people who think they may have imposter syndrome themselves. Some of this is resonating and think, I'll check it out. And what I do in the book is I take people through step by step the process to change that belief, and so that you can get through it and really understand what's happening. Why is it happening? And one of the big message in that is it's not you, right? It's not personal. It's not who we are. And you're certainly not alone, because so many people have it. And more importantly, there is a solution. If we use the right methods, we can make this completely go away. And that is very exciting, because you're not changing your personality, right? You're changing what's stopping you. It's just like having a nail in your shoe, right? You can say, oh, I'm tough, I'm strong, I'm brave because I've got this nail in my shoe and I'm still walking forwards. Yeah, well, how about we just take the nail out, and then you'll be able to walk forwards comfortably and faster and really enjoy walking.
Right. So, if I understand correctly, imposter syndrome is not something that has been medically defined. Then, if
That's right.
somebody, yeah, if someone understands or suspects that he or she has this, who should they turn to? Friends, family, internally, or a therapist, or outside? I know you are a specialist. How
Yeah.
does that work? What should be the first port of call for someone who suspects about this particular syndrome?
Well, first is to check that it is imposter syndrome. So there is a quiz. I think we're going to put it in the links. It's a free quiz. You take the quiz and you get a score. And if you've got over 50%, then imposter syndrome is having an effect in your life. If you get over 62%, then it's having a significant effect in your life. So that's the very, very first place to start. It doesn't get helped by therapy, because it's considered normal functioning, right? It's not a dysfunction. So yes, you can build support. That's something that will at least calm it down a little bit, make it easier to cope with. But to get rid of it, it does need the specialist work that me and several other specialists in the world deal with.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about help, let's talk about your program, Inner Success. You have got this particular program. Tell us a bit about that so that people who want to, know more about this, they can, talk to you for further details.
Yeah, so this is a one-to-one program, because imposter syndrome is experienced in a very personal way. So they've tried dealing with it in groups, and it's not nearly so good. And so it's a 8-step program, 8 modules, and we work through each one of those. It takes around an average of 13 weeks to complete. And we take people through first calming the nervous system, getting us to a because until the nervous system is calm, till your brain is calm, you can't make the changes. Then we focus on clearing that one belief that gets in the way, that causes imposter syndrome. And then finally we look at creating all the good habits that people have tried to put in place, but imposter syndrome has been blocking them from it. So it is an overall leadership and personal development program, and it includes in there imposter syndrome and getting rid of it.
Wonderful. There is much to learn from you, Tara, and about these things. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to learn from you, about you, and also from your book. So, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so my website is the easiest, outsmartimpostersyndrome.com. My books are on Amazon, including, Amazon all over the world. So they're in Amazon India as well. So that's a very, very good place to start.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.